You think modern cookbooks have all the best recipes? Think again. Generations of home cooks filled their kitchens with brilliant side dishes that have since vanished from dinner tables and slipped into obscurity. Let's dig into 60 forgotten side dishes you could only find in old cookbooks. Scalloped potatoes were the definition of comfort food. Simple, rich, and reliable. Layers of thinly sliced potatoes baked in cream and butter, often topped with cheese if the family could spare it. This was Sunday dinner material, a dish that filled both the stomach and the heart. It was the kind of food that made home smell like hope. Even during tough times, potatoes were always there, cheap, filling, and forgiving. The magic was in the patience. Slow baking until the edges browned and the sauce thickened into pure warmth. Every bite carried the memory of family gathered around the table, waiting for that first spoonful. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't fancy, but it was everything you needed to feel okay. Some dishes feed the body. This one fed the soul. And even now, when instant meals rule the day, the smell of scalloped potatoes still calls people home, just like it did 50 years ago. Creamed onions were once a standard Thanksgiving side dish, showing up on tables across the country during the holiday season. Pearl onions were boiled until tender, then coated in a rich white sauce made from butter, flour, and milk, sometimes finished with a sprinkle of nutmeg. The dish was warm, smooth, and comforting, offering a milder flavor that balanced stronger foods like turkey and stuffing. Families looked forward to it because it felt festive, appearing only during special occasions. Housewives valued it as a way to use inexpensive onions in a celebratory manner, transforming a humble vegetable into something elegant. Children might not have been enthusiastic, but they ate it because it was tradition. Over time, Thanksgiving menus expanded with new sides, and creamed onions quietly slipped away. Today, it is one of those dishes remembered by grandparents, but rarely prepared anymore. For much of the mid-century era, however, creamed onions held a place of honor on holiday tables, symbolizing warmth, tradition, and family togetherness during celebrations. Pickled watermelon rind was one of the most surprising side dishes of the decade, turning what many would throw away into something flavorful and refreshing. Housewives peeled the green outer skin, sliced the white rind, and simmered it in a brine of vinegar, sugar, and spices until it became tender and tangy. The result was a sweet-sour pickle that was served in relish trays or alongside meats. It was a way of practicing thrift while also creating a unique taste that stood out at gatherings. Families valued it because it stretched food further and prevented waste, while guests admired its novelty. Pickled watermelon rind reflected the ingenuity of making use of every part of seasonal produce. It brought brightness to heavy meals and was a talking point at tables where everyone expected the usual pickles. Though it has nearly disappeared today, it once stood proudly as a reminder of how resourcefulness and creativity could turn scraps into something memorable. Cheesy cauliflower gratin was a rich and indulgent vegetable side that found a special place in many vintage kitchens. Tender cauliflower florets were smothered in a creamy, cheesy sauce before being baked under a crispy layer of toasted breadcrumbs. This gratin was a perfect example of comfort food, combining the mild flavor of cauliflower with the lusciousness of melted cheese and a golden, crunchy top. Betty Crocker cookbooks featured this dish as a versatile accompaniment for both everyday meals and holiday feasts. Its creamy texture and cheesy goodness made it a hit with both children and adults, especially those who might usually shy away from vegetables. The gratin's warm, bubbling surface was a welcome sight at any dinner table, signaling a dish full of hearty flavor and home-style care. This recipe demonstrated how simple vegetables could be transformed into something special and satisfying, making cheesy cauliflower gratin a nostalgic classic worth revisiting. German potato salad was never meant to be cold, and that was the beauty of it. Grandma would boil red potatoes until tender, then toss them with crisp bacon, diced onions, and a sharp vinegary dressing while everything was still warm. The result was tangy, salty, and just a little sweet. Rich from the bacon but lifted by the vinegar. It was a staple at summer picnics and church potlucks, served straight from the pan or kept warm under foil. Unlike the creamy versions most people know today, this one had no mayonnaise and needed no chilling. It felt more like a real dish than a filler side, and it paired perfectly with sausages, roast chicken, or just a good slice of rye bread. You might find a recipe scribbled in pencil in the back of Grandma's cookbook, passed down from a German aunt or neighbor. It was hearty, practical, and impossible to stop eating once you started. These days, it is rare to find someone who still makes it from scratch. But the warmth, both literal and emotional, is something no cold potato salad can match. Hot bacon spinach salad was the hearty side that disappeared when lighter, trendier salads took over, but back then, it was a real crowd pleaser. You tossed fresh spinach with onions and poured warm bacon grease and vinegar dressing over the top so everything wilted down into tangy, savory perfection. It sounds decadent because it was, and it balanced out roast meats, casseroles, or whatever you were stretching that night. Recipes like this filled cookbooks from the 1940s to the 60s when families turned humble staples and garden greens into something satisfying. Hot bacon spinach salad was a smart way to use greens before they wilted and bacon grease before it went to waste. You would find it at church suppers, family dinners, or tucked in handwritten recipe cards, quietly filling plates. It faded off most tables today, but back then, this rich, tangy salad was one more trick for turning basics into something worth savoring. Tomato aspic salad was one of those strange creations that could only have come from a time when gelatin ruled the kitchen. It was a savory molded dish, tomato juice thickened with unflavored gelatin, then loaded with chopped celery, olives, or green peppers, depending on what Grandma had on hand. The result? A firm, wobbly side dish served cold, usually cut into slices or cubes and placed proudly next to roast beef or deviled eggs. People either adored it or found it baffling, but no one forgot it. Tomato aspic was especially popular at luncheons, bridge clubs, and church picnics, where presentation mattered just as much as taste. It looked refined, in a retro sort of way, and was always served with a smile. The tangy, lightly spicy flavor made it oddly refreshing in the summertime, even if no one asked for seconds. Some recipes even added a dab of mayonnaise on top to finish the look. Today, tomato aspic is more often the butt of jokes than a dish on the menu. But for those who grew up with it, it brings back memories of glass dishes, ruffled tablecloths, and a different kind of dining pride. Roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon were a caramelized, savory side that brought together crispy, tender Brussels sprouts and smoky bacon bits in a perfect marriage of flavors. This dish was a favorite in Betty Crocker cookbooks for its ability to transform a sometimes overlooked vegetable into a crowd-pleasing classic. The sprouts were roasted until their outer leaves turned crisp and golden, while the insides remained tender and sweet. Tossed with crumbled, crispy bacon, the combination delivered smoky richness that balanced the sprouts' natural earthiness and slight bitterness. This side was often served at family dinners and holiday feasts, praised for its simplicity and bold flavor. It perfectly captured the mid-century American love for hearty, flavorful vegetables paired with savory meats. Roasted Brussels sprouts with bacon remains a nostalgic staple that continues to delight those seeking comfort with a little crunch and smoky depth. Cottage cheese ring with vegetables was another molded side dish that highlighted how much the 1970s embraced shapes and presentation. Cottage cheese was whipped with gelatin until it could hold its form, then set into a ring mold and chilled. The hollow center was filled with cold vegetables like peppers, celery, or cucumbers. The dish was creamy, tangy, and refreshing, making it a curious addition to potlucks and luncheons. Guests were often impressed by its tidy presentation, and the mixture of textures made it interesting to eat. It was one of those recipes that stretched inexpensive cottage cheese into something bigger and more impressive. Housewives valued it because it could be made ahead and kept chilled until serving time, freeing up energy for other preparations. It was thrifty but visually striking, capturing the era's fascination with molds. While it may not appeal to modern tastes, cottage cheese ring with vegetables once stood as a proud centerpiece of 1970s gatherings. Marinated artichoke hearts became a fashionable side dish in the 1970s, when the rise of Mediterranean flavors gave American tables something exotic. Housewives bought jars of artichokes packed in oil and herbs, serving them cold alongside roasts, pasta, or chicken. They looked elegant in glass dishes, offering a glossy sheen and unusual flavor compared to ordinary vegetables. For many families, they represented sophistication, the kind of food you might see in magazines and want to try at home. Children were often baffled by their taste, but adults embraced them as proof that everyday meals could feel cosmopolitan. They showed up at potlucks, dinner parties, and even holiday spreads, often combined with olives or cheese. The convenience of simply opening a jar made them especially attractive during busy years when families wanted flavor without fuss. Eventually, their novelty wore off, and marinated artichokes became less common outside specialty cooking. Still, for a time, they were a symbol of trendiness, showing how international foods could reshape the American side dish. Stuffed celery with pimento cheese was the fancy finger food of bridge clubs and living rooms filled with laughter. Celery sticks filled with bright orange spread looked sophisticated enough to serve with tea sandwiches and cocktails. The mix of sharp cheese, pimentos, and mayonnaise was smooth, tangy, and slightly addictive. A few daring hosts sprinkled paprika or crushed pecans on top, giving each bite an unexpected twist. Served on glass platters, they caught the light and made even an afternoon snack feel like a celebration. It was neat, portable, and perfectly polite. Food that said you cared without overdoing it. Housewives prided themselves on getting the filling just right, creamy but firm enough not to spill. Guests nibbled between games of cards or stories about the neighbors, savoring the crunch and the spice. It was social food, designed for company and compliments. Today it feels quaint, but one bite still carries that charming hum of mid-century civility. For a while, celery never looked so glamorous. Tomato aspic with shrimp garnish might be the ultimate example of how far gelatin molds could be pushed during the 1970s. Housewives would take tomato juice, mix it with unflavored gelatin, and let it set in ornate molds until it became a firm, jiggling centerpiece. On top of that shimmering red dome, cold shrimp would be arranged in neat patterns, often crowned with parsley for decoration. The dish was tangy, savory, and oddly refreshing, though the texture caught some people off guard. It was served cold as a side or appetizer, sometimes sliced into wedges like a cake. For potlucks and luncheons, tomato aspic stood out on the table because it looked unusual and sophisticated. It was the kind of dish that showed effort and creativity, even if guests approached it with caution. In an era that loved experimentation with molds, this savory gelatin became a conversation starter as much as a food. Though long gone from modern tables, it represents the quirky inventiveness of 1970s kitchens. Tomato and cucumber aspic was a refreshing vegetable aspic, combining ripe tomatoes, crisp cucumbers, and a light gelatin base for a cool, savory side dish. This vintage recipe was common in Betty Crocker cookbooks as an elegant addition to summer dinners and potluck gatherings. The tomatoes and cucumbers were diced and suspended in a clear, savory gelatin flavored with herbs and broth, creating a visually appealing and palate-cleansing dish. Served chilled, this aspic offered a crisp texture and mild, refreshing flavor that balanced richer main courses. Its unique texture and vibrant colors made it a conversation piece on the dinner table, while its lightness provided a cool contrast during warmer months. Tomato and cucumber aspic reflected mid-century America's fondness for creative gelatin dishes that were both decorative and delicious. This side dish remains a nostalgic reminder of a time when aspics were celebrated for their culinary flair and home cook ingenuity. Creamed cucumbers were a summertime staple, cool, tangy, and surprisingly comforting. Grandma would slice cucumbers paper thin and let them sit with salt until they softened just enough. Then she would stir in a mixture of cream, vinegar, sugar, and dill to create a light, soupy dressing that clung to every bite. Served cold in a glass bowl, creamed cucumbers were the answer to long, hot days and heavy main dishes. They were crisp, clean, and a little bit indulgent in their own way. You could eat them with fried chicken, pork chops, or all on their own with a slice of bread. It was one of those recipes that looked effortless but had just the right balance of flavors. It cooled you down without making you feel like you were missing out, Nowadays, you might find cucumber salads with yogurt or fancy vinaigrettes, but the original creamed version has almost vanished. That old-school charm, the soft herbs, the tangy cream, has been quietly replaced. But there is something about the way it felt to scoop out a chilled bowl and take a bite that felt like it belonged to home. Buttered parsley potatoes were the kind of humble, forgotten side dish that quietly filled plates and satisfied appetites across America, especially during lean times. You would boil small baby potatoes, toss them in butter, sprinkle with chopped parsley, and serve them up next to roast beef, fried chicken, or whatever you had on the table that night. It was not flashy, but back in the day, that was the whole point. Simple, affordable, filling, and easy to dress up with ingredients straight from your garden or pantry. You would find recipes like this tucked in the pages of faded cookbooks from the 1930s to the 70s, passed along at potlucks and family dinners. Buttered parsley potatoes were proof that you did not need much to make a side dish feel complete. They soaked up gravy, balanced out heavier meals, and stretched your groceries farther when money was tight. These days, they have slipped off most dinner tables, but back then, a bowl of buttery potatoes meant you brought comfort, simplicity, and just a little bit of pride to the meal. Baked macaroni and tomatoes was a hearty casserole that stood proudly on dinner tables before creamy macaroni and cheese became the standard. It combined pasta with stewed or canned tomatoes, seasoned with onions, salt, and pepper, then baked until the flavors melded together. Families appreciated its affordability since both macaroni and canned tomatoes were inexpensive staples available throughout the year. The dish was filling and could easily serve as either a side or a main meal when money was tight. Housewives liked how flexible it was, often adding bits of bacon, cheese, or leftover vegetables when available. Children enjoyed the tangy tomato flavor, which was far more exciting than plain noodles. It was especially common in the 1940s and 1950s, when pantry cooking shaped much of American dining. Though baked macaroni and tomatoes has largely vanished from modern meals, it remains a snapshot of mid-century kitchens, where practicality ruled and flavor was drawn from whatever ingredients could be stretched farthest. For many families, it was comfort food at its most frugal and dependable. Cabbage slaw with pineapple turned something ordinary into a tropical dream. Crunchy shredded cabbage mixed with sweet pineapple chunks and a tangy dressing. It was summer in a bowl. The sharp vinegar balanced the syrup, and suddenly the backyard barbecue felt a little brighter. It was practical too, using up leftover cabbage and canned fruit before either could spoil. Housewives loved how it looked, colorful, refreshing, and cheap to make. The pineapple gave it a spark of cheer, the kind that made even hot days feel breezy. Served cold, it cut through heavy meats and starches, a flash of lightness amid comfort food. Every bite was crisp and playful, a reminder that good flavor could come from unlikely pairings. This dish showed that mid-century America wasn't afraid of fun, it just served it with mayonnaise. Cauliflower au gratin was a side dish that brought comfort and richness to 1970s dinner tables. Cauliflower florets were steamed until tender, then smothered in a cream sauce heavy with cheese and baked beneath a topping of breadcrumbs. The result was a bubbling golden dish that gave the plain vegetable an entirely new identity. Families enjoyed it as a complement to roasts, chicken, or even pork chops because it added both substance and flavor. Housewives liked it because it could be assembled ahead and baked when needed, making it ideal for busy schedules. It was creamy, hearty, and indulgent, fitting perfectly into the casserole craze of the time. Children who might have resisted cauliflower on its own often enjoyed it baked under the cheese and crumb topping. Cauliflower au gratin proved that vegetables did not have to be boring, and that with enough butter and cheese they could become centerpieces of meals. Though it feels old-fashioned today, it once represented the height of comfort cooking in the 1970s. Deviled potato salad put a zesty spin on the traditional potato salad by adding a tangy mustard-based dressing that packed a flavorful punch. This vintage recipe took boiled potatoes and tossed them in a dressing made with yellow mustard, mayonnaise, vinegar, and seasonings to create a vibrant and slightly spicy side dish. Betty Crocker cookbooks celebrated deviled potato salad for its bold taste and easy preparation, making it a favorite at picnics, barbecues, and family gatherings. The mustard gave the creamy salad a lively kick that contrasted nicely with the soft potatoes, adding excitement to a classic comfort food. Often garnished with chopped chives or paprika, this salad brought both color and flavor to the table. It was a dish that pleased crowds by balancing creamy, tangy, and savory elements, all while remaining simple enough for home cooks to prepare in advance. Deviled potato salad remains a nostalgic reminder of inventive takes on beloved American classics. Creamed chipped carrots were never flashy, but they had their place in Grandma's dinner rotation. She would slice carrots thin, sometimes with a hand crank slicer, and simmer them until tender, then fold them into a creamy white sauce with butter and flour. The sauce was just enough to coat the carrots without drowning them, adding a gentle richness that softened their natural sweetness. You would find them beside meatloaf or roast turkey, sometimes served in little ramekins or scooped straight from a saucepan. It was a quiet dish, comforting in a way that did not ask for attention. No spices, no tricks, just care, warmth, and the steady flavor of carrots made special. They were easy to prepare, cheap to make, and always familiar. These days, carrots are raw in lunchboxes or roasted with glaze, but the creamed version is nearly forgotten. Yet there was a time when this simple dish brought real joy to the table. It deserves more than silence. Potato puff bake was one of those thrifty, comforting sides that turned plain old mashed potatoes into something brand new with hardly any extra effort. Families back then knew how to stretch leftovers, and this recipe proved it. You would take yesterday's mashed potatoes, mix in an egg or two, maybe a little butter or milk, and bake them in small mounds until they puffed up golden brown on the outside but stayed soft and fluffy in the center. Potato puff bake found its way into all those old spiral-bound cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards because it was cheap, filling, and practical. Back in the day, wasting food was not an option, and turning leftovers into something that felt special at dinner was just smart kitchen work. You would serve them next to roast meats, pork chops, or with a little gravy when not much else was on hand. It was simple, it was satisfying, and it made a plain meal stretch farther. You hardly see them now, but back then, potato puffs were a dependable trick that kept families fed and made every meal feel just a little more complete. Sweet pickled beets were the taste of color itself, deep ruby slices glistening in syrupy vinegar. They stained every plate they touched, and nobody minded. The mix of sweet and sour made them both shocking and comforting. They started as a way to preserve crops, but soon became a table staple. Housewives took pride in their jars lined up like jewels in the pantry. Each one captured sunlight and season, ready to brighten even the dullest meal. Served chilled, they added tang to roasts and warmth to salads. They were messy, yes, but that was part of their charm. The flavor lingered, earthy and bold, reminding everyone that beauty could come from dirt and patience. In a decade obsessed with presentation, these beets stood proud, honest, vibrant, and unforgettable. Creamed spinach was a dish that once held a secure place both at home and in steakhouses. Fresh or frozen spinach was cooked down, then combined with butter, cream, and a hint of nutmeg to create a rich, velvety side. It paired beautifully with roasts and steaks, making it a favorite in both home kitchens and restaurants. Families appreciated its nutritional value as well as its comforting taste, which softened the bitterness of spinach. It was one way to get children to eat their greens, dressed up with enough creaminess to feel indulgent. In steakhouses, creamed spinach was considered essential, often appearing alongside baked potatoes as the classic pairing for a hearty dinner. Though lighter vegetable dishes eventually replaced it, creamed spinach had a long run as a dependable, beloved side. Today, it has nearly disappeared from everyday family meals, but it remains a reminder of a time when richness and comfort were valued at the dinner table as much as thrift. Avocado pineapple salad was one of those curious combinations that only the 1970s could have produced. Avocado halves were scooped and filled with pineapple chunks, then topped with a dollop of mayonnaise or sometimes cottage cheese. The result was a creamy, tangy, and slightly sweet side dish that looked exotic at potlucks and luncheons. Housewives appreciated it because avocados were gaining popularity and pineapple, whether canned or fresh, was inexpensive and readily available. The pairing of fruit with creamy dressings was a trend that defined the decade, and avocado-pineapple salad fit neatly into that mold. Guests were often intrigued by the unusual combination, and while some loved it, others hesitated at the blend of flavors. Still, it represented the playful experimentation of the time, when food was as much about presentation and novelty as it was about taste. Avocado-pineapple salad, though nearly lost today, stands as a snapshot of a decade that thrived on curiosity and creativity at the table. Celery and walnut salad was a classic side that brought crunch and creaminess together in perfect harmony. Crisp celery stalks were sliced thin and mixed with crunchy walnuts, then tossed in a light mayonnaise or yogurt dressing, creating a refreshing contrast in textures. This salad was often a staple in Betty Crocker cookbooks, celebrated for its ease and the satisfying bite it added to any meal. The cool, slightly bitter celery balanced the rich, buttery walnuts, while the creamy dressing tied it all together with a touch of tang. It was a favored side for holiday dinners and everyday meals alike, offering a healthy option that was still indulgent enough to feel like a treat. The nutty flavor of walnuts brought depth, and the salad's pale green hues added a fresh pop of color to the dinner plate. Its simple yet elegant nature made it beloved by home cooks seeking something light and wholesome to complement heartier mains. Corn oysters were one of those Depression-era dishes that did not have a lick of seafood but still felt like something fancy. Grandma would mix corn, usually fresh or canned, with eggs, flour, and a bit of milk to make a thick batter. Then she would fry little spoonfuls in hot oil or bacon grease until they puffed up golden and crispy around the edges. The name came from the way they looked, round, plump, and golden, like a fried oyster. But they were made of nothing more than corn and love. These fritters were often served as a side dish with soup or meatloaf, or even stacked up for breakfast. They were quick to make, easy to stretch, and always got eaten before they had time to cool. Kids loved them, adults counted on them, and they used up whatever corn you had on hand. Some folks added chopped peppers or onions for extra flavor, but the original was good enough all by itself. Corn oysters were proof that you did not need much to make something satisfying. You just needed a hot pan, a good spoon, and a little bit of memory. Stewed zucchini with tomatoes was one of those quiet, dependable side dishes that showed up on dinner tables when garden produce was in full swing and folks needed to stretch meals without spending extra money. You would slice up fresh zucchini, toss it with onions, canned tomatoes, maybe a little garlic or herbs, and simmer it down until soft, saucy, and comforting. It was simple, affordable, and practical, making it a favorite in community cookbooks and handwritten recipe cards from the 1940s through the 70s. Families leaned on dishes like this to use up garden harvests or swap in pantry staples when fresh vegetables were scarce. Stewed zucchini with tomatoes showed up at potlucks, Sunday dinners, and quiet weeknight meals, adding a little color and comfort to whatever main dish you managed to scrape together. It might not have been the star of the table, but it was the kind of side that kept everyone full and satisfied, especially when budgets were tight. You do not see it much outside of vintage recipe collections today, but back then, it was a thrifty, nourishing dish that brought humble ingredients to life. Lime gelatin cottage cheese salad was the moment sweet and savory met in a green, jiggly handshake. Picture this: bright lime jello blended with cottage cheese, crushed pineapple, and sometimes even mayonnaise. It sounds like a dare, but in the mid-century kitchen, it was pride on a platter. Housewives clipped the recipe from magazines and swore by its refreshing charm. It was the kind of dish that said you were both thrifty and creative, able to turn pantry leftovers into something fancy. The lime gave it sparkle, the cottage cheese gave it weight, and the pineapple made sure kids didn't complain too much. Served on iceberg lettuce or in a gleaming mold, it was the ultimate test of hospitality. If it jiggled, it counted. It's easy to laugh at now, But in the days before ready-made desserts, this salad carried a certain hopefulness, proof that color, flavor, and economy could all coexist in one bowl. It was culinary optimism, pure and unashamed. Some called it strange, others called it genius, but everyone remembered it. And maybe that's what really mattered in a time when even a salad could sparkle. Potatoes. Anna looked like something you would see at a fancy restaurant, but Grandma made it with nothing more than a sharp knife, a heavy pan, and a little patience. She would slice potatoes paper thin and layer them with butter. No shortcuts, no fuss. The pan would go on the stove first to crisp the bottom, then into the oven to bake until golden and crackling on the edges. When she flipped it out onto a plate, it came out in one perfect buttery circle. The center was tender, the outside crisp, and every bite was simple but rich. Potatoes Anna might sound French, and it is, but like many things, Grandma made it her own. You could find it next to roast beef or a pork chop, or sometimes served all by itself when there was not much else. It was elegant without being complicated, and filling without being heavy. These days, you would need a mandolin and a YouTube video to pull it off. But Grandma just had her hands, her memory, and a cast-iron skillet. And that was all she needed. Creamed peas on toast points was one of those simple yet oddly elegant sides that showed up on dinner tables and cafe menus all across America, especially when money was tight. You would simmer soft peas in a creamy, buttery sauce, spoon them over crisp triangles of toasted bread, and serve them with roast meats or as a light lunch all by themselves. This recipe came straight from those old faded cookbooks where frugal, filling meals ruled the kitchen. It proved even basic ingredients like canned peas and day-old bread could turn into something satisfying when you got creative. Back in the 1940s and 50s, meals like this helped families stretch groceries while still feeling polished and proper at the table. Creamed peas on toast points showed up at Sunday suppers, holiday dinners, and even tea time spreads because it was comforting, affordable, and easy to whip together when groceries were running low. It might sound simple now, but back then, this creamy, green-topped toast was a welcome sight. Celery with pimiento cheese was a simple but striking buffet favorite that added a pop of color to spreads filled with casseroles and meats. Celery stalks were trimmed, chilled until crisp, and then stuffed with a bright orange pimiento cheese spread. The combination of creamy, sharp cheese with crunchy celery made for a satisfying bite. It was inexpensive, easy to prepare, and visually appealing, which is why it appeared at so many parties, picnics, and luncheons. The pimiento spread itself was made with cheddar, mayonnaise, and diced pimentos, giving it a tangy and slightly sweet edge. Children enjoyed the crunch, while adults praised its nostalgic flavor. It was often arranged on trays in neat rows, making it look both tidy and inviting. Celery with pimiento cheese was the kind of dish that carried Southern influence into mainstream gatherings during the 1970s. Though overlooked now, it once stood as a dependable, cheerful option that could be counted on to disappear quickly from the table. Pineapple and cheese salad might sound strange to modern ears, but it was once a beloved mid-century favorite. A canned pineapple ring would be laid on a bed of lettuce, topped with a slice of sharp cheddar cheese, and finished with a dollop of mayonnaise. The combination of sweet, salty, and creamy flavors made it memorable, even if unusual. It was quick to prepare, colorful on the plate, and affordable since canned pineapple had become widely available by then. Children liked the sweetness of the fruit, while adults valued the contrast of cheese and tangy dressing. This dish often appeared at luncheons, bridge parties, and holiday tables, offering something that looked cheerful without requiring much effort. It reflected a time when canned goods were celebrated as modern conveniences that brought exotic tastes into ordinary kitchens. Though it has nearly vanished from menus today, pineapple and cheese salad once brightened countless tables, proving that simplicity and novelty could live side by side in one dish. Potato salad with vinegar dressing came before the mayonnaise age, and it carried a quiet kind of dignity. It was tart, sharp, and refreshingly honest, a working person's dish built from what was available. boiled potatoes tossed in vinegar, onions, and a touch of mustard made for a salad that didn't spoil in the sun. Some families would add bits of bacon or fresh herbs, stretching the recipe with whatever the garden or pantry offered. The longer it sat, the more those flavors deepened, creating something richer than its humble ingredients promised. It belonged at picnics, roadside diners, and back porches where paper plates bent under its weight. The flavor was bold but humble, the kind of food that reminded people of hard work and good company. It was comfort without the cream, flavor without the fuss. This was the salad that traveled well and aged gracefully, soaking up more taste with every hour it sat. Even now, a forkful of that tangy, tender potato brings back memories of checkered tablecloths and lemonade sweating in glass pitchers. It was the past, perfectly preserved in vinegar. Stewed rhubarb was once a spring and summer side dish that added tart brightness to otherwise heavy meals. Families harvested the tall red stalks from backyard gardens, slicing and simmering them with sugar until they softened into a tangy sauce. It was served warm or chilled, sometimes alongside meat dishes, but just as often spooned over bread or biscuits. The sharp flavor made it stand out, providing a contrast to the rich, fatty foods that dominated dinner tables. Housewives valued it as a seasonal staple that could be prepared quickly and stretched into several meals. Children found its tartness surprising, though a generous amount of sugar helped make it more appealing. Stewed rhubarb fit perfectly into a culture of seasonal eating when what grew in the garden dictated what was on the plate. Over time, rhubarb became tied mainly to pies and desserts, pushing stewed versions aside. Yet for many families, it was once an essential spring side dish that brought freshness and vitality to everyday suppers. Cold beet borscht cups brought an unusual European influence into American kitchens of the 1970s. Beets were boiled, chilled, and pureed into a cold soup flavored with vinegar, dill, and sometimes sour cream. Instead of serving it in bowls, housewives poured it into small cups, offering it as a quirky side or appetizer. The vibrant magenta color made it striking, and its refreshing taste stood out at summer gatherings. While not everyone embraced its earthy flavor, those who did found it invigorating, especially when paired with bread or crackers. Cold beet borscht cups reflected the era's willingness to experiment with international dishes, even if they seemed unusual on American tables. They were considered refined in some circles, a nod to cosmopolitan tastes during a decade of culinary curiosity. For families, they offered variety and a sense of something different from the usual casseroles and gelatin salads. Today, they seem nearly forgotten, but they once represented the adventurous spirit of 1970s kitchens. Mashed rutabagas were a less common but beloved vintage side dish that brought a buttery, creamy twist to a hearty root vegetable. This mashed treat was a staple in many Betty Crocker cookbooks, especially during times when variety was sought beyond the usual potatoes. Rutabagas, with their slightly sweet and earthy flavor, were boiled and mashed with butter and cream to create a smooth, comforting side that paired beautifully with roasted meats and stews. Their pale yellow color and mild taste made them a subtle yet satisfying addition to any plate. Unlike the more familiar mashed potatoes, rutabagas offered a slightly different texture and a hint of natural sweetness that made the dish feel special. It was a side that echoed simpler times and frugal kitchens, where every ingredient was stretched and savored. Mashed rutabagas stood as a testament to vintage American cooking's ability to find comfort in unexpected places. Ambrosia salad was not really a salad in the way we think of salads today. It was a dessert disguised as a side dish. Grandma would fold together canned mandarin oranges, crushed pineapple, shredded coconut, mini marshmallows, and whipped cream, sometimes with a spoonful of sour cream to give it balance. It was creamy, sweet, and just fancy enough to make it onto the holiday table next to the turkey or ham. For many families, this was a taste of celebration. Kids loved it for the marshmallows, adults appreciated the simplicity, and everyone agreed it belonged at every potluck. Ambrosia was the kind of thing that made it into every community cookbook. Easy to make, hard to mess up, and always a crowd pleaser. You could throw it together with pantry items, Let it chill for a few hours, and it would hold up just fine. Some versions added maraschino cherries or pecans for a little extra flair. These days, you might see similar flavors in retro-themed desserts, but the original ambrosia has mostly disappeared from our tables. Maybe it was too sweet, too fluffy, or just too old-fashioned. Cornflake-topped vegetable medley was the crunchy, thrifty side dish that showed up at potlucks and family dinners, straight from those old spiral-bound cookbooks. You would take canned or frozen vegetables, stir them with cream sauce, pour it into a casserole dish, and finish it with a layer of crushed cornflakes before baking. It sounds unusual now, but back then, this topping was genius. It added crunch, stretched ingredients, and turned plain vegetables into something hearty. Cornflake-topped vegetable medley earned its spot at the table because it made basic produce feel dressed up enough for guests or holidays. It sat proudly next to meatloaf, roast turkey, or ham, offering crispy contrast to heavier mains. Families loved it for how easy it was to throw together, how well it traveled to potlucks, and how much kids liked the crunchy topping. You hardly see it now, but back then, that golden cornflake crust meant you brought your best, even when groceries were tight. It proved simple ingredients could still make a meal feel special and complete. Harvard beets were a sweet and sour side dish that reflected the Midwestern love of hearty, simple foods. Beets were simmered in vinegar, sugar, and butter until tender, then thickened into a glossy sauce. The balance of tangy and sweet flavors made them stand out among plainer vegetables. They were inexpensive, easy to prepare, and filling, which made them a regular presence at supper tables. Housewives often turned to this recipe when other vegetables were scarce, since beets stored well and were available throughout the year. Children sometimes resisted the strong flavor, but adults valued their versatility and nutrition. The dish was particularly popular in Midwestern kitchens, where families saw it as both practical and comforting. Over time, tastes shifted, and beets themselves became less common on American tables, leaving Harvard beets to fade into memory. For much of the 20th century, however, they were a staple side dish that represented the balance of thrift, flavor, and tradition in American cooking. Cabbage slaw with sunflower seeds was a crunchy twist on the classic coleslaw, giving it a slightly nutty bite that made it memorable. Shredded cabbage was tossed with carrots and sometimes raisins, then mixed with mayonnaise or vinegar dressing. Sunflower seeds were sprinkled in, adding both texture and a surprising depth of flavor. This variation became popular because it felt fresh and wholesome, fitting the health-focused trends creeping into the 1970s. It was also affordable, since cabbage was inexpensive and sunflower seeds were widely available in bulk. Families loved it because it paired well with grilled meats, baked chicken, or sandwiches, and it held up well at picnics. It was light but filling, crunchy but creamy, and versatile enough for all kinds of gatherings. Children often picked at the seeds while parents appreciated the nutritional value. Though it has almost vanished from modern tables, cabbage slaw with sunflower seeds once stood proudly as a reflection of the era's push toward foods that felt both homemade and just a little different. Green bean almondine was a classic vegetable side that combined fresh green beans sautéed with butter, garlic, and toasted almonds for a nutty, buttery flavor. This elegant dish often appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as an easy way to elevate simple green beans into a special occasion side. The green beans were cooked until tender but still crisp, then quickly tossed in a skillet with melted butter and minced garlic to infuse them with rich, savory notes. Toasted almonds added a delightful crunch and nutty aroma, making every bite a perfect balance of textures. Green bean almondine was popular at dinner parties and holiday tables, praised for its sophisticated yet approachable flavor. It showcased mid-century home cooking's love for combining fresh vegetables with buttery richness and a crunchy finish. This side remains a nostalgic favorite for its bright green color, satisfying bite, and warm, nutty undertones that complement a wide variety of main dishes. Parsnip and carrot mash was a rustic dish that felt both hearty and refined, depending on how Grandma served it. She would boil peeled carrots and parsnips until soft, then mash them with butter, salt, and just a dash of cream or broth. The result was a golden mash with a hint of sweetness and a whisper of spice, thanks to the natural flavors of the vegetables. It was lighter than mashed potatoes, but still deeply satisfying. Often served alongside roast chicken or pork, it brought color and comfort to the table. Parsnips had a stronger flavor than carrots, so Grandma would sometimes tone it down with a bit of apple or potato if she had it. The mash was served hot, usually with a pat of butter melting into the top, and it filled the kitchen with a rich, earthy smell. These days, most people skip parsnips altogether or never think to mash them, but this was a dish that stretched garden roots into something nourishing and beautiful. It was humble food made with care, and that made all the difference. Gelatin Perfection Salad was proof that mid-century cooks saw no limit to what could jiggle. Lemon jello was the stage, and the cast included carrots, cabbage, and bell peppers, all suspended in translucent glory. The word perfection might have been wishful thinking, but to the homemakers of the 1950s, this dish symbolized elegance. It was served in ring molds at luncheons, sliced with precision, and garnished with a single sprig of parsley for effect. The idea was that modern food could be art, efficient, colorful, and neatly controlled. Housewives took pride in mastering the mold, timing the chill just right so the vegetables didn't sink. The flavor was crisp, tangy, and oddly refreshing, though the texture took some courage. To the modern tongue, it feels like salad trapped in time. But back then, it was innovation on a plate, the shining centerpiece of progress. And maybe that was the point. It wasn't about taste, but about showing the world how beautiful homemade could be, even when it came from a box. Molded cranberry salad was one of those gelatin creations that became linked to Thanksgiving and Christmas meals. Cranberries, often canned, were mixed with nuts, citrus, and sometimes celery, then set in a bright red gelatin mold. It was eye-catching, colorful, and perfectly in step with the mid-century love of molded salads. Housewives served it as a side dish that walked the line between savory and sweet, complementing turkey and stuffing with its tart bite. Children liked the wobbling texture and sweetness, while adults valued the festive presentation it brought to the table. The dish reflected how important appearance had become in family meals, where even side dishes were expected to impress guests. Molded cranberry salad carried a celebratory quality, marking holidays with something more decorative than practical. Though it has almost entirely disappeared from modern feasts, it was once an expected presence at holiday dinners, a symbol of how food and tradition worked hand in hand to create family memories. Homemade sauerkraut was a tangy, crunchy staple deeply rooted in German-American cooking traditions during the mid-20th century. This fermented cabbage was prized for its sharp flavor and probiotic benefits, offering a unique taste that complemented hearty meats and robust meals. Betty Crocker cookbooks provided simple methods for making sauerkraut at home, emphasizing patience and proper fermentation to achieve the perfect balance of sourness and texture. The process involved shredding cabbage, salting it, and letting it ferment slowly, transforming a basic vegetable into a lively and flavorful side. Sauerkraut was a common accompaniment at family dinners, Oktoberfest celebrations, and holiday feasts, especially in regions with strong German heritage. Its crisp bite and tangy punch added brightness to heavy dishes like sausages and pork roasts. This side dish embodied a connection to heritage and home-style cooking, carrying traditions across generations while offering a distinctive tang that remains beloved by many today. Celery Victor sounds like a recipe that came from a fancy hotel menu, but this marinated celery dish made its way into regular households thanks to those old cookbook collections in every drawer. It was as simple as boiling celery until tender, chilling it in broth or vinegar, and serving it up with herbs or hard-boiled eggs when you wanted to show off. You could find it at potlucks or holiday tables, dressed up to look fancier than it was. People back then knew how to stretch even the humblest ingredients into something worthy of company. Celery Victor turned plain celery into a crisp, tangy salad that felt like a proper side dish next to roasted meats or casseroles. It showed up in cookbooks throughout the 1930s and 40s, passed along at church suppers and family gatherings. Hot fruit compote was the kind of side dish that brought comfort in the coldest months of the year. Grandma would bake a mix of canned or fresh fruits, apples, pears, peaches, cherries, together with a little cinnamon, sugar, and maybe a splash of orange juice or brandy. Served warm, it was sweet but not sugary, soft but never mushy. It sat beside baked ham, roast beef, or pork tenderloin, and offered a gentle sweetness to balance all the salt and spice. Compote made use of whatever fruit was around, even the bruised or overripe pieces. It was practical and indulgent at the same time. Some versions added raisins or nuts, others leaned on citrus zest for brightness. Either way, it made the kitchen smell like something special was happening. Today, most people do not think to warm fruit as a side dish, but once, it was a small gesture of love, something to round out a meal and make it feel whole. You can almost still taste it if you close your eyes. Smashed peas and potatoes was a creamy, comforting side dish that combined mashed peas and potatoes into a smooth, lightly seasoned blend. This vintage recipe appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as an economical and satisfying vegetable side that brought together the best of two staples. Peas were cooked until tender, then mashed together with boiled potatoes, butter, salt, and pepper to create a velvety texture and harmonious flavor. The dish was praised for its simplicity and heartiness, offering a way to stretch ingredients while still delivering on taste and nutrition. Smashed peas and potatoes was often served with roasted meats or fried dishes, providing a creamy and slightly sweet complement. Its mild flavor and smooth consistency made it a family-friendly choice that could be prepared quickly and easily. This recipe reflects the mid-century focus on comfort and practicality in the kitchen, turning simple vegetables into a satisfying and nostalgic side dish. Puffed wheat casserole was an inventive way to take a breakfast cereal and turn it into a savory side dish. Housewives would mix puffed wheat with a cheesy sauce, spread it in a baking dish, and bake until bubbly and golden. The cereal acted like breadcrumbs, giving the dish a toasty crunch on top while softening inside. It was unusual but surprisingly comforting, and it showed the willingness of 1970s kitchens to stretch pantry staples in new directions. Puffed wheat casserole paired well with meats or stood on its own for light meals. Children liked it because of the cereal connection, while adults appreciated its frugality and flavor. It was easy to prepare in large pans, making it a natural fit for potlucks. Though it has mostly disappeared, it embodies the spirit of reimagining everyday ingredients. Puffed wheat casserole may sound strange now, but in the 1970s it carried warmth, thrift, and a dash of creativity that made it memorable. Pickled okra was a southern staple that once filled jars lined up on pantry shelves, ready to add tang and crunch to everyday meals. The pods were packed with vinegar, garlic, and spices, creating a side dish that balanced fried meats and heavy vegetables. Families served them straight from the jar, a sharp counterpoint to rich suppers that needed a lighter bite. Housewives valued them because okra grew easily and abundantly, making pickling a natural way to preserve the harvest. Children were divided, with some enjoying the unusual snap and others rejecting the sliminess of fresh okra. Pickled versions, however, were firmer and easier to enjoy. They traveled well to church picnics, Sunday lunches, and community gatherings, always adding a tangy burst to plates. Over time, changing tastes and the decline of home pickling left them behind. Today, pickled okra is rare outside specialty stores, but once it was a common and beloved addition that brought brightness and tradition to everyday Southern dining tables. Three-bean salad was the make-ahead miracle of the refrigerator age. Lima, kidney, and wax beans tossed in vinegar dressing. It was tangy, colorful, and proud of its simplicity. You could find a jar of it sitting cold on a glass shelf, flavors deepening day by day until it hit its perfect moment. Housewives adored it because it was dependable. No wilting, no worry, and it tasted even better the longer it sat. It was the kind of salad that made itself while you did the laundry. Bright green and red hues glowed through picnic jars and potluck bowls, promising something both refreshing and familiar. It wasn't flashy, but it belonged on every table, especially next to fried chicken or sandwiches. The sweetness of the dressing met the bite of the vinegar in a dance of old-fashioned comfort. It was thrifty too, made from pantry staples that didn't spoil fast. Each scoop carried a bit of nostalgia for a simpler kitchen, when recipes had 5 ingredients and endless patience. People might have laughed at its simplicity, but the taste was honest, and sometimes that was enough. Cheesy broccoli rice casserole was the star of every potluck from the 1970s onward. Velveeta melted into something golden and gooey, binding tender broccoli and soft rice into a dish that felt both modern and homemade. It was the definition of comfort in a casserole dish, bright, creamy, and undeniably addictive. Some cooks snuck in diced chicken or mushrooms to make it heartier, while others topped it with crushed crackers for extra crunch. No matter the variation, it came bubbling out of the oven, smelling like warmth itself. The aroma filled entire community halls long before the first serving was scooped. Housewives loved it for its dependability. Kids loved it because it hid the vegetables under layers of cheese. It represented the new age of convenience, where processed food met heartwarming tradition halfway. Every bite was a warm reminder that food didn't need to be fancy to feel like love. And when the spoon scraped the last bit from the pan, you knew you had brought the right dish. Cold asparagus with mayo dressing was once a springtime side dish that celebrated the short but abundant asparagus season. Spears were boiled until tender, chilled, and arranged neatly on plates with a spoonful of mayonnaise or sometimes a mustard dressing. The dish was simple but elegant, appearing at Easter dinners, luncheons, and family gatherings. Housewives valued it for its presentation, since the bright green stalks looked festive and fresh. It was also practical, because it could be prepared ahead of time and served cold, freeing up time for main dishes. Children often resisted asparagus, but the creamy dressing made it easier to swallow. Cold asparagus represented an era when vegetables were served plainly, highlighting their natural flavor rather than disguising them. As canned and frozen vegetables took over, dishes like this fell out of style, replaced by heavier casseroles and convenient sides. Once a sign of seasonal eating, cold asparagus with mayo dressing is now largely forgotten, remembered only in vintage cookbooks and family traditions. Cucumber Bavarian cream was one of the most unusual molded salads of the 1970s. Cucumbers were pureed, blended with gelatin, and folded into cream before being poured into molds and chilled. The result was a pale green dish with a smooth texture and cool, refreshing flavor. It was often served in slices as part of buffet spreads, adding a quirky yet elegant note to the table. Guests were intrigued by its appearance, even if the flavor surprised them. Housewives liked it because it took a simple, inexpensive vegetable and transformed it into something striking. It was also considered refined, borrowing from European influences that were fashionable at the time. While the texture confused some diners, others found it light and refreshing. Cucumber Bavarian cream may sound peculiar now, but it showcased the 1970s willingness to experiment with ingredients and forms. It was playful, creative, and a reminder that even the humblest vegetable could become something entirely unexpected. Pickled cucumber relish was a tangy and crunchy condiment that brought zip and brightness to meals, often found alongside classic meat dishes. This relish, made from finely chopped pickled cucumbers mixed with onions and spices, was a staple in many Betty Crocker cookbooks as a quick way to add flavor contrast and freshness to the dinner plate. The sharp, acidic bite of the pickles balanced rich and savory mains, while the crunchy texture provided a satisfying counterpoint. This relish was versatile, serving as a side accompaniment, a topping for sandwiches, or a tangy addition to barbecue plates. Its bright green color and lively taste made it a beloved component of many mid-century American meals. The relish's easy preparation and long shelf life made it a practical favorite in home kitchens. It perfectly captured the era's love for bold flavors and simple, accessible recipes that elevated everyday meals. Succotash with lima beans was not just a dish. It was a Depression-era survival tool that somehow made it into Grandma's regular rotation. Sweet corn and soft lima beans were simmered together in a little butter or cream, sometimes with bell peppers or onions tossed in for good measure. It was filling, cheap, and surprisingly nutritious, which made it perfect for families trying to stretch every last dime. Succotash had deep roots too, traced back to Native American cooking, and became especially popular in the South and Midwest. If your grandma had a victory garden, you probably had succotash at least once a week. It was served warm, spooned right from the pot, and though it was never flashy, it was honest food. A dish that said, "We have enough to share." Some people added bacon or ham to punch it up, others kept it plain and let the vegetables speak. But the core recipe stayed the same for generations. These days, succotash barely makes an appearance outside of history books or heritage festivals. Mock oyster casserole, also known as eggplant dressing, was one of those clever Depression-era recipes that made its way into old cookbooks and never fully disappeared. The name might raise a few eyebrows now, but the whole point was to create a rich, flavorful casserole that mimicked the texture and heartiness of oyster stuffing without needing expensive seafood. You would take cooked eggplant, breadcrumbs, onions, and herbs, bake it until golden on top, and serve it as a side dish at holiday dinners or Sunday suppers. It filled out the table, stretched garden produce, and made even the simplest meal feel just a little more complete. Back then, you could find recipes like this scribbled in the margins of faded cookbooks or passed along at church potlucks. People knew how to make do with what they had, and this casserole proved that even eggplant could stand in for something fancier. You might not find it on modern menus, but back then, eggplant dressing was a practical, comforting side that made every meal feel just a little more special. Cottage cheese salad was the quiet hero of mid-century potlucks and family suppers, even if no one talks about it much anymore. You would start with a scoop of plain cottage cheese, soft, tangy, and mild. Then fold in fruit like pineapple, sliced peaches, or even chopped tomatoes, depending on the occasion. Some versions leaned sweet with whipped cream or gelatin. Others stayed savory with cucumbers or chives. Either way, it was a refreshing, creamy dish that needed no cooking and very little prep. It was served chilled on a lettuce leaf or in a glass bowl, the kind that caught the sunlight just right. It might not have turned heads, but it always got eaten. Cottage cheese salad was something you made when you wanted to offer something light, simple, and just a little different. It was affordable, nutritious, and versatile, ideal for hot summers or holiday tables alike. Today, it has all but vanished, replaced by packaged sides or dressed-up grain salads. But those who remember it know how comforting that cool, creamy bite could be. Sometimes the quietest dishes are the hardest to forget. Carrot and raisin salad was a sweet and tangy side that brightened many American tables throughout the mid-20th century. Shredded carrots were mixed with plump, sweet raisins and dressed in a creamy or tangy sauce, often based on mayonnaise or yogurt, creating a delightful balance of flavors and textures. This salad was celebrated in Betty Crocker cookbooks for its simplicity and its ability to sneak some vegetables into meals with a touch of sweetness kids would actually enjoy. The natural sugar of the raisins complemented the earthiness of the carrots, while the creamy dressing gave it richness without overwhelming the fresh ingredients. It was often served chilled, providing a cool, refreshing bite that paired well with meat dishes and casseroles. The vibrant orange and dark raisin speckles made it visually appealing, while the crunch of the carrots added a satisfying texture. Carrot and raisin salad remains a nostalgic reminder of home cooking where healthy met tasty in a perfect union. Shredded wheat tomato bake was one of those unusual dishes that turned a breakfast staple into something savory for dinner tables. Housewives would layer shredded wheat biscuits in a casserole dish, pour stewed tomatoes over them, and top it with grated cheese. When baked, the biscuits softened into a dense base that absorbed all the tomato flavor, while the cheese formed a golden crust. It was thrifty, creative, and surprisingly filling, making it a dependable addition for meatless nights. Children often raised eyebrows at the sight, but many families relied on it to stretch limited groceries. It carried a home-style charm and was easy to put together using pantry items that were already on hand. Though it may sound odd today, shredded wheat tomato bake reflected the 1970s trend of experimentation in casseroles. It was practical, it was comforting, and it showed how resourceful cooks were in making the most of what they had. While forgotten now, it once carried a quiet sense of pride to buffet spreads. Wild rice pilaf was once considered an exotic and special side dish, particularly in the Midwest where wild rice was harvested locally. The nutty flavor and chewy texture made it stand out compared to plain white rice, and it was often combined with mushrooms, onions, and broth. Pilaf was usually reserved for holidays, weddings, or Sunday dinners when something more refined was expected. Housewives appreciated that it looked elegant but was not overly complicated to prepare. Children often approached it with suspicion, unused to darker grains, but adults embraced its rich flavor and sense of novelty. As convenience rice products and boxed mixes grew in popularity, wild rice pilaf faded from everyday use. It became associated more with fine dining than family tables, losing its role as a celebratory household dish. Still, in the mid-century years, wild rice pilaf was a symbol of sophistication, showing how even modest kitchens could present something that felt worldly, special, and different from the daily routine of potatoes or bread. Frozen cranberry salad was the glamorous chill of a mid-century refrigerator fantasy. Blushing pink from whipped cream and crushed fruit, it was poured into molds and served cold on lettuce leaves as if presentation alone could make it a meal. It towed the line between dessert and salad, a beloved confusion of sweet and tart. Housewives prepared it days in advance, freezing it in Tupperware trays for luncheons and church gatherings. Every bite was creamy, icy, and nostalgic, a cool contrast to the warm casseroles beside it. The cranberries added a sparkle, the whipped cream softened the tang, and the lettuce, well, it made people feel like they were eating healthy. It was the perfect reflection of its era, fancy-looking, easy to make, and quietly indulgent. For a few shimmering moments, every guest felt like they were tasting something straight out of a magazine ad. Succotash was one of the most enduring side dishes to come out of the Depression years, making use of ingredients that were cheap, plentiful, and filling. It combined corn and lima beans, simmered together in butter or drippings to create a simple but hearty dish. Many households kept canned corn and beans on hand, so succotash required little planning and could be pulled together quickly. It was both nutritious and practical, stretching small amounts of vegetables into something substantial enough to serve alongside meat or bread. Children might not have loved lima beans, but they ate succotash because it was always there, dependable and filling. The dish carried over into the 1940s and 1950s, often appearing at holiday tables alongside turkey or chicken. In some regions, variations added cream or peppers to give it more depth. By the late 20th century, succotash slipped from popularity, but for decades it was a comfort food that reminded families of resilience and thrift during leaner times. Cheese soufflé casserole was a simplified take on the classic French soufflé, adapted for the practicality of American households. Instead of fussing with delicate timing and perfect rises, housewives would prepare a cheesy egg mixture and bake it in a casserole dish until puffy and golden. It offered the look and taste of a soufflé without the stress of collapse, making it ideal for potlucks and family dinners. The dish carried a rich, savory flavor that paired well with salads, meats, or even just bread. It was hearty enough to act as a main dish, but usually played the role of a side, standing proudly among other casseroles of the era. For families who wanted to bring something impressive to gatherings, cheese soufflé casserole delivered both taste and reliability. Children liked its creamy texture, while adults appreciated the sense of European flair without complicated cooking. Though the soufflé name gave it elegance, the casserole format made it accessible to everyone. Today it is almost forgotten, but in the 1970s it was a proud showcase of ingenuity. Baked sweet potato fries were a popular twist on the classic potato side, offering a sweet and savory alternative that baked to crispy perfection. Thinly sliced sweet potatoes were tossed in seasonings, often cinnamon, salt, or paprika, and baked until tender on the inside and slightly crisp on the edges. This healthier option appeared in many Betty Crocker cookbooks as a way to enjoy fries without deep frying, perfect for families seeking convenience and flavor. The natural sweetness of the potatoes paired beautifully with the warm spices, creating a comforting side that complemented both casual meals and special dinners. Baked sweet potato fries were easy to prepare and could be customized with various seasoning blends, making them versatile for many tastes. Their vibrant orange color brightened the plate, and the satisfying crunch made them a hit with kids and adults alike. These fries were a testament to how a simple vegetable could be transformed into a crowd-pleasing side that brought both nostalgia and a fresh twist to the table. Green tomato relish was one of those tangy little extras that brought bold flavor to plain meals even when the pantry was bare. Grandma would take firm, unripe tomatoes, too stubborn to ripen before the first frost, and chop them finely with onions, peppers, and vinegar. Add sugar, mustard seeds, and celery salt, and you had a thick, bright relish that woke up whatever it touched. It was spooned onto meatloaf, smeared onto sandwiches, or set in a bowl next to pork chops and roast chicken. It had that vinegary punch that made you sit up a little straighter with every bite. People canned it in glass jars and lined their shelves with it like treasure. It was a late summer ritual in many homes, part of the rhythm of putting up food for winter. Green tomato relish was born out of waste not thinking, salvaging fruit that otherwise would rot on the vine. But it also brought a surprising brightness to heavy meals. You almost never see it now, not even in farmers' markets. But anyone who tasted it remembers it sharp, sweet, and impossible to forget. Cucumber and sour cream slaw was the kind of cool, crisp side dish that showed up quietly at family picnics, luncheons, and Sunday dinners long before store-bought coleslaw took over. It was simple to make, but packed the refreshing punch you wanted next to a hot, heavy meal. Thin cucumber slices were tossed in sour cream, vinegar, dill, and sometimes a little sugar, creating a creamy, tangy salad that balanced fried chicken, pork chops, or pot roast. This was a summertime favorite, straight from those old cookbooks where frugality ruled the kitchen. Folks needed side dishes that stretched ingredients but still made meals feel whole, especially when gardens overflowed with cucumbers. You would find this slaw chilling in glass bowls at potlucks and reunions, cooling everyone off after long days in stuffy kitchens. It is nearly forgotten now, but for decades, this creamy cucumber salad was the quiet hero of summer tables, showing how something simple like a cucumber and sour cream could make a meal feel complete. Jell-O. Ambrosia salad was more than just dessert. It was a centerpiece. Every table from church basements to family picnics had at least one bowl shimmering under the lights, layered in colors only mid-century America could love. Lime green, strawberry red, and pastel pinks all trapped fruit cocktail, marshmallows, and shredded coconut in a wobbling dream of sweetness. Housewives guarded their gelatin ratios like state secrets, swearing their mixture set faster, brighter, or smoother than the neighbors. It was light, it was cheap, and it felt modern, a miracle of processed convenience. The word ambrosia hinted at something heavenly, but the taste was pure nostalgia. The sweetness of canned fruit, the cool bounce of gelatin, the faint chill of a refrigerator humming on a summer afternoon. For kids, it was a reward. For adults, it was pride. Some claimed it was salad. Others knew better. But in a world learning to trust instant food, this wobbly bowl became a cultural handshake, the symbol of how America could turn sugar and science into comfort. Even if it melted too fast in the heat, nobody cared. It was family, it was color, and it was the sweet sound of spoons clinking against glass bowls while the world outside hurried forward. Fried apples were once a familiar side dish in Southern homes, where fruit was often treated as part of the main meal rather than dessert. Sliced apples were sautéed in butter and sprinkled with sugar, cooked until tender and golden. The dish had a natural sweetness that made it popular with children, while still pairing well with savory foods like pork chops or biscuits. Housewives liked fried apples because they required no special equipment, just a skillet and whatever fruit was on hand. They worked especially well in autumn when orchards provided more apples than families could eat fresh. Leftover apples nearing spoilage could also be saved from waste by frying them, which fit the thrifty mentality of the time. The scent of apples cooking in butter filled kitchens with warmth and comfort, becoming part of many families' food memories. Although fried apples have mostly vanished from modern dinners, they remain one of those sides that defined regional tradition, a reminder of when practicality and sweetness blended seamlessly on the dinner table. Prune whip mold was a dessert-like side dish that found its way onto many 1970s tables. Prunes were stewed until soft, whipped into a light puree, and folded with gelatin and whipped cream. The mixture was poured into molds and chilled until it set, creating a delicate, airy texture. The flavor was sweet yet mild, offering a way to enjoy fruit in a new and interesting form. It was often served in slices or scoops, sometimes topped with extra cream or nuts. Housewives relied on prune whip mold because it was easy to prepare, inexpensive, and could be made ahead of time for gatherings. It appealed especially to adults who appreciated its subtle sweetness and lightness after heavy main dishes. Prune whip mold carried the same charm as other gelatin-based recipes of the era, with the bonus of feeling wholesome thanks to the fruit base. Though it has nearly disappeared from menus today, it once held a firm place as a creative, thrifty, and surprisingly elegant dish for families and guests alike. Spinach and mushroom casserole was a hearty vegetable side that brought comfort and creaminess to the dinner table. Tender spinach and earthy mushrooms were baked together in a rich, creamy sauce, often thickened with cheese or cream of mushroom soup, creating a luscious dish with layers of flavor. Betty Crocker cookbooks frequently featured this casserole as a crowd-pleasing accompaniment to roasts or holiday meals, appreciated for turning humble vegetables into something indulgent and satisfying. The mushrooms added a meaty texture that balanced the tender spinach, while the creamy sauce wrapped everything in warmth and richness. This casserole could be prepared ahead of time and baked just before serving, making it a convenient option for busy home cooks. Its combination of fresh greens and deep mushroom flavors made it a staple in kitchens longing for both nutrition and comfort. The golden top, sometimes sprinkled with breadcrumbs or extra cheese, gave it an inviting crust that made it hard to resist. Jellied cabbage salad might sound like a dare today, but in Grandma's kitchen, it was a dish of pride. This was not some jiggly dessert. This was savory gelatin, made with cabbage, carrots, vinegar, and sometimes a hint of onion or celery. The gelatin was clear and firm, often made with tomato or lemon juice instead of just water. The vegetables were suspended in it like little windows into the garden. It was served cold, sliced into neat squares, and always had a place at the table during luncheons or church dinners. Some versions were topped with mayonnaise or set into ring molds with a little lettuce garnish in the center. You had to have grown up with it to understand why it mattered. It was refreshing, texturally strange, but oddly satisfying. Today, we turn our noses up at savory gelatin, but back then, it was a sign of effort and hospitality, a dish that took time, not shortcuts. Maybe it is time we looked at those odd recipes again, with curiosity instead of judgment. Rice ring with creamed vegetables was the side you pulled out to impress, even if all you had was rice, peas, and a few carrots. This molded rice dish showed up at luncheons, community suppers, and potlucks from the 1930s to the 60s, proving how fancy rice could look with the right presentation. You cooked seasoned rice, packed it into a bundt or gelatin mold, and once it's set, filled the center with creamy peas, carrots, and maybe mushrooms or green beans if you had them. It was affordable, filling, and looked fancier than it really was. These molded sides were all the rage, straight from vintage cookbooks with curled edges and faded ink. Rice ring with creamed vegetables was a no-nonsense way to stretch pantry staples while making the table look proper. You hardly see it outside old recipe cards now, but back then, it was a thrifty, creative dish that added kitchen pride to any meal. Macaroni salad with Miracle Whip was the summer anthem of every small-town gathering. Cold pasta mixed with sweet dressing, diced pickles, and maybe a little onion if you were daring. It sat proudly beside fried chicken and baked beans, a creamy, cheerful presence that said, "Welcome." This was food meant for community, block parties, church suppers, 4th of July cookouts. No one cared if it came from a box mix or grandma's old Pyrex bowl. It was the spirit that counted. The secret ingredient, Miracle Whip, wasn't mayonnaise. It was optimism in a jar. Tangy, light, and oddly addictive, it made even the simplest ingredients sing. Every bite had a balance of memory and comfort, the taste of laughter echoing off porches and picnic tables. It was quick to make, easy to share, and impossible to improve upon. Sure, some recipes got wild, ham chunks, peas, even raisins. But at its heart, this was the American dream in salad form. It brought everyone together, no matter how hot the day or how small the town. And long after the paper plates were tossed, that creamy sweetness lingered like a fond goodbye. Jell-O vegetable salad was a creation that reflected both creativity and mid-century pride in convenience foods. Housewives would suspend peas, carrots, celery, or even olives inside brightly colored gelatin molds, often flavored with lime or lemon. These molds were carefully unmolded onto plates, sometimes garnished with lettuce to make them look more formal. They were a display piece as much as a side dish, reflecting how gelatin symbolized modern cooking in the 1960s. For children, it was often confusing to see vegetables trapped in wobbly desserts, but for adults, it represented resourcefulness and style. Recipes appeared in magazines and community cookbooks, encouraging homemakers to experiment with colors and textures. At potlucks, these shimmering molds stood tall on tables, admired as much for their appearance as their taste. Over time, the trend faded as people grew weary of the odd flavor pairings. Yet for a period, Jell-O vegetable salads were not just food but conversation starters at American family tables. Celery crown salad was as much a visual piece as it was a food because the presentation mattered almost more than the taste. Housewives would take celery stalks, chill them until crisp, then fan them into the shape of a crown on a serving platter. The stalks would be held together with toothpicks or bands and then dressed with mayonnaise or a cheese-based sauce to add flavor. Sometimes pimentos or olives were added for color, turning the plain green into something more dramatic. It was refreshing, crunchy, and light, which made it a common sight on buffet tables crowded with heavier casseroles. The 1970s were a time when appearance at the table held value, and celery crown salad looked like something made with care even if it was simple to assemble. It offered a cool bite that balanced the richness of other dishes, and children often picked at it because of its playful shape. Though rarely made today, it once brought a sense of occasion to everyday celery. Creamed spinach was a rich and traditional vegetable accompaniment that found its way onto many classic American dinner tables. Tender spinach leaves were cooked down and enveloped in a smooth, creamy white sauce made from butter, cream, and sometimes cheese or nutmeg. This dish was prized for its silky texture and deep, comforting flavor, making it an ideal partner for steaks, roasts, and holiday meals. Betty Crocker cookbooks frequently included creamed spinach as a reliable crowd pleaser, offering home cooks a way to elevate greens into a luxurious side dish. The creaminess softened the sometimes bitter edge of spinach, creating a luscious mouthfeel that felt indulgent yet nourishing. Its glossy, pale green appearance made it visually inviting, and its rich flavor helped balance hearty mains. Creamed spinach remains a symbol of timeless comfort food, showcasing how simple ingredients can create a dish full of warmth and nostalgia. Rice-stuffed bell peppers were a dish that turned summer garden bounty into something worth remembering. Grandma would take big, shiny peppers, green or red depending on what grew best, and hollow them out with care. Then came the filling: cooked rice mixed with cheese, vegetables, tomato sauce, and sometimes ground beef or beans. She would bake them until the peppers softened and the tops browned just slightly. The dish smelled like comfort itself, bubbling quietly in a worn-out casserole pan. These stuffed peppers were served warm, but tasted just as good the next day out of the icebox. They were frugal, filling, and full of flavor, ideal for feeding a crowd with just a few ingredients. For many families, they were a way to use up leftovers and still put something beautiful on the table. The colors alone made them feel like a celebration. They are still made here and there, but often buried under cheese or too fussy to feel the same. The original ones were about balance, vegetables doing the heavy lifting, rice carrying the weight. They were summer in edible form, baked in love. Watergate salad, also known as pistachio delight, was one of those playful pastel green sides that walked the line between dessert and salad, confusing generations of potluck guests along the way. You would mix instant pistachio pudding with whipped topping, marshmallows, canned pineapple, and chopped nuts, fold it all together, and serve it chilled in a big glass bowl that practically screamed retro kitsch. It sounds more like a dessert, but back in the 1970s, this fluffy, sweet salad showed up next to roast ham, turkey, and casseroles at family dinners and holiday gatherings. Watergate salad came straight from the pages of vintage cookbooks, celebrated for how it turned inexpensive pantry staples into a crowd pleaser with hardly any effort. It earned its place at the table by stretching ingredients, adding color, and giving every meal a playful, sugary twist. You might not see it much today outside of retro recipe revivals, but once upon a time, this fluffy green salad meant you brought your best, even if it doubled as dessert. Strange by today's standards, but back then, it was a potluck must-have that turned heads and satisfied sweet tooths. Molded tomato aspic was a dish that dared you to look twice and maybe reconsider. Bright red, glossy, and jiggling like something from a science fair, it was supposed to be salad but looked like sculpture. Housewives of the 1950s called it elegant, though many guests politely pretended otherwise. Tomato juice thickened with gelatin, flecked with celery or green olives, and chilled in a ring mold. It was a product of its time, when the word modern meant oddly gelatinous. People served it proudly on lettuce leaves, as if daring you to question their culinary courage. The irony is, it did taste refreshing if you could get past the texture, like a cool, savory punch on a hot day. It was what happened when America's love for Jell-O met its fear of waste. Every scrap of produce could live again, suspended forever in tomato jelly. Some recipes even added shrimp or hard-boiled eggs, pushing the limits of good taste and patience. Today, it's more conversation piece than cuisine, but back then it was ambition in edible form. Housewives believed progress could fit in a mold, and sometimes it really did, even if the result wobbled more than expected. Corn pudding was a baked custard that blended corn, eggs, and milk into a warm, comforting dish. Served most often during holidays, it became a tradition at Thanksgiving and Christmas tables across the country. The sweetness of the corn balanced the richness of the custard, creating something that felt both hearty and indulgent. Families looked forward to it because it transformed an ordinary pantry staple into something that felt festive. It was easy to make in large quantities, which made it practical for gatherings. Recipes varied from family to family, with some adding sugar for a dessert-like quality and others keeping it savory with butter and salt. The dish carried a homey nostalgia that tied generations together as many children grew up watching it come out of the oven golden brown. While it has faded from modern meals, corn pudding was once a holiday highlight that brought warmth and sweetness to tables during the 1940s and 1950s, becoming a memory wrapped in tradition. Lima bean supreme was a side dish that took a humble legume and dressed it up for special occasions. Lima beans were simmered until tender, then folded into a creamy sauce often flavored with butter, milk, and a touch of nutmeg. The mixture was poured into a baking dish, topped with breadcrumbs, and baked until golden and bubbling. It transformed the often overlooked lima bean into something rich and comforting, with a texture that appealed even to those who usually avoided them. Housewives appreciated it because it was economical, yet felt dressed up enough to bring to potlucks or serve at Sunday dinners. Children were coaxed into eating their vegetables when lima bean supreme appeared because the creamy sauce softened the flavors and made it more approachable. It was one of those recipes that fit perfectly into the casserole culture of the 1970s, blending thrift with a little indulgence. Today it is hard to find, but it once stood as proof that even the plainest vegetables could be made into something memorable. Broiled grapefruit with brown sugar was a simple yet elegant side dish that warmed many hearts and kitchens. Halved grapefruits were topped generously with brown sugar, then broiled until caramelized, creating a slightly crisp, golden crust that contrasted with the juicy, tart fruit beneath. The result was a warm, zesty bite that balanced sweetness and tang in a way that felt both indulgent and healthy. This dish appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as a bright finish to heavier meals or as a breakfast treat for those wanting something fresh yet comforting. The caramelized sugar added depth and a subtle crunch, turning humble grapefruit into a dessert-like delight. It was especially popular during winter, when citrus was in season and the warm oven created a cozy kitchen atmosphere. The blend of warmth, tartness, and sweet caramel made this side dish memorable, and it often became a topic of conversation at the family table. It was a wonderful example of how simple ingredients could be transformed into something special with just a broiler and a little patience. Scalloped corn casserole was one of those cozy, golden-topped dishes that never needed a main course to shine. It started with sweet corn, fresh, canned, or creamed, mixed with milk, eggs, a bit of sugar, and crushed saltine crackers or breadcrumbs. Then it was baked until it set into a soft, custard-like center with a crispy, buttery top. This dish showed up at potlucks, funerals, holiday dinners, anywhere people came together and needed something warm and familiar. You did not need a lot of money to make it, just pantry staples and a steady oven. The smell alone was enough to call everyone to the table. Some versions had chopped peppers or bits of onion, others stayed simple and sweet. But no matter how you made it, it had the same purpose: comfort. Scalloped corn casserole made vegetables feel indulgent, like something you could take pride in bringing to a neighbor's house. It was the kind of dish that lived in handwritten notes and passed down recipes, not cookbooks with glossy photos. And somewhere along the way, it got pushed aside for flashier sides. But for those who remember, it will always be the taste of home. Pineapple cheese salad sounds like one of those retro recipes that people talk about with equal parts horror and nostalgia, but this sweet and savory mashup was a potluck star once upon a time. You would mix canned pineapple chunks with shredded cheddar cheese and mayonnaise, sometimes tossing in a maraschino cherry on top to seal the deal. It sounds like a strange combination today, but back in the 1950s and 60s, recipes like this came straight out of the old spiral-bound cookbooks tucked in every kitchen drawer. People loved it for its bright, tangy sweetness and how easy it was to throw together with cheap pantry staples. Pineapple cheese salad showed up at luncheons, holiday tables, and potlucks, holding its own next to roast turkey, ham, or casseroles. It might raise a few eyebrows now, but back then, that quirky little salad was a way to dress up a meal and bring something special to the table without spending a fortune. In its day, this strange, creamy creation meant you came prepared. Peas and pearl onions were a staple of wintertime cooking, especially when fresh vegetables were hard to come by. Grandma knew how to make something special out of pantry basics, and this dish was proof. Canned or frozen peas were gently warmed with tender pearl onions, often from a jar, and simmered in butter or a light cream sauce. The result was simple but comforting, with just enough sweetness and bite to sit perfectly alongside roast turkey or baked ham. You would see it on holiday tables, often scooped out of a deep ceramic dish with a worn wooden spoon. Some families added herbs like thyme or parsley, but the heart of the recipe never changed. It was about taking small, soft vegetables and giving them care, warmth, and just a bit of love. Peas and pearl onions did not shout for attention. They were the quiet kind of dish that stuck with you anyway. They are almost never made anymore, except by the rare home cook flipping through a dusty cookbook. But for the folks who remember, one bite can bring back a dozen meals from long ago. Corn pudding with jalapenos was a spicy and comforting twist on the classic creamy corn casserole often found in vintage American kitchens. This dish mixed sweet corn kernels with eggs, milk, and a mild chili pepper to add a gentle heat that warmed the palate without overpowering it. Betty Crocker cookbooks recommended this variation to bring a little excitement and flavor complexity to the traditional corn pudding, a beloved side at holiday meals and family dinners. The jalapenos provided a subtle kick that balanced the natural sweetness of the corn, while the custardy texture made it irresistibly creamy and satisfying. Baked until golden and slightly puffed, this corn pudding offered a colorful, flavorful accompaniment that stood out on the table. It was a way for home cooks to add personality to a simple vegetable side while keeping things approachable for all ages. This recipe remains a nostalgic nod to creative mid-century cooking that embraced both comfort and a touch of spice. Mock potato salad made with cauliflower was a quirky child of the late 1970s diet craze. It promised all the comfort of the original without the guilt of starch or mayonnaise. Cauliflower stood in for potatoes, dressed in vinegar or light dressing, sometimes sprinkled with paprika for illusion's sake. Some home cooks mashed it for a smoother texture, while others left it chunky to trick the eye. The taste was lighter, but still rich enough to fool the heart into thinking it was the real thing. It was inventive, maybe even ahead of its time. Housewives chasing health trends served it proudly, half believing and half pretending it was just as good. Some loved it, others politely endured it, but everyone admired the creativity. It reflected a changing America, one counting calories instead of pennies, chasing wellness instead of fullness. The taste might not have fooled anyone, but it said something important. Even nostalgia learns to adapt. And in that way, it earned its quiet place on the vintage table. Pickled beets and eggs were once a pantry staple in rural households, bringing both color and nutrition to the family table. Hard-boiled eggs were stored in jars with beets, vinegar, sugar, and spices, creating a striking pink hue and tangy flavor. This dish was practical because it kept well without refrigeration, making it ideal for farm families or those with limited storage. The flavor was bold and unusual, with the eggs taking on the sweetness and acidity of the beet brine. Children often found them strange, but adults enjoyed their brightness as a change from plain sides. They were especially popular in Pennsylvania Dutch kitchens, where they carried cultural significance. The dish required little effort and used inexpensive ingredients, which was valuable during rationing years. Though rarely seen on tables now, pickled beets and eggs were once an essential reminder of frugality, resourcefulness, and the joy of adding color and flavor to otherwise simple meals during the mid-century years. Mock crab salad was the thrifty answer for families who wanted the sophistication of seafood without paying seafood prices. The recipe appeared often in budget cookbooks, calling for shredded vegetables like cabbage or zucchini mixed with mayonnaise and seasoning to mimic the look and texture of crab. A splash of vinegar or lemon juice added tang, while paprika or celery seed provided color and flavor. Served chilled, it was spooned onto lettuce leaves or stuffed into tomatoes, making it look fancier than it really was. Housewives loved it because it gave the illusion of serving something indulgent while costing only pennies. It worked well as a potluck dish since it could be prepared in large batches and kept cool until serving time. For families, it was a playful way to bring variety to the table when fish was out of reach. Though it has mostly disappeared today, mock crab salad captures the spirit of resourceful 1970s cooking, where appearance and ingenuity counted for just as much as actual ingredients. Baked potato salad was a warm variation of the classic salad, combining potatoes with bacon, onions, and a tangy dressing served either hot or cold. This recipe appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as a hearty and flavorful side perfect for picnics, barbecues, and potlucks. The potatoes were usually boiled or roasted, then mixed with crisp bacon pieces and sautéed onions, all tossed in a dressing that balanced tanginess with creaminess. Serving the salad warm brought out the depth of flavors and made it especially comforting during cooler months. Its rich yet simple combination of ingredients made it a popular choice for those seeking a side that went beyond the usual. Baked potato salad offered a nostalgic taste of Americana, blending smoky, savory, and tangy notes into one satisfying dish. It captured the mid-century spirit of hearty, shareable food that brought families and friends together around the table. Breaded eggplant rounds were a summer favorite that tasted like fried sunshine. Grandma would slice eggplants into thick coins, dip them in egg and breadcrumbs, sometimes with a bit of cornmeal, and fry them until golden and crisp. They were salty on the outside, creamy on the inside, and just hearty enough to stand in for meat when money was tight. You could serve them on their own, with tomato sauce, or tucked into a sandwich with melted cheese. They were messy to make and disappeared faster than she could fry them. The best ones were fresh from the garden, deep purple and still warm from the sun. Eggplant was not always a kid favorite, but this dish changed minds quickly. It was comfort food with a little bit of crunch and a lot of history. Today, eggplant shows up more in global recipes than in grandma's style of home cooking. But back then, it was a clever way to make something simple feel satisfying. Peach cottage cheese ring was the light, fruity side that felt fancy enough for luncheons and church gatherings, but came from pure thriftiness. You would mix cottage cheese with gelatin, chill it in a mold, and serve it sliced with canned peach halves nestled in the center. It looked polished, used pantry staples, and added sweetness to a plain meal. Recipes like this popped up everywhere from community fundraisers to backyard picnics, adding color and a little protein to the table when produce was scarce. Peach cottage cheese ring balanced between salad and dessert, offering a cool, refreshing break from heavier dishes like fried chicken, meatloaf, or casseroles. Families leaned on molded salads like this to stretch groceries and make meals feel complete. It might sound quirky now, but back then, seeing that glossy, fruit-topped ring on the table meant your hostess brought care to the meal, no matter the grocery budget. It was simple, thrifty, and filled with quiet kitchen pride from a time when every dish had to count. Pineapple cheese casserole was one of those southern miracles that sounded wrong but felt right. Sweet pineapple chunks baked under a layer of sharp cheddar and buttery cracker crumbs. It was a dish that lived somewhere between dessert and side dish. It first appeared in church cookbooks, where the faithful found joy in mixing sugar with salt and calling it Sunday comfort. The contrast was the magic, the tang of cheese against syrupy fruit, the crunch of crackers over melted sweetness. You could find it at weddings, funerals, and potlucks alike, anywhere people gathered to eat and remember. It was warmth on a plate, a recipe that refused to fit neatly into categories. In a world that often wanted things tidy and proper, this casserole was unapologetically odd, but it worked. People loved it not just for the flavor, but for the feeling. It was homemade love with a rebel streak. The kind of dish that started as a whisper in one kitchen and ended up famous across generations. Today it still turns heads, because nothing else tastes quite like nostalgia baked golden. Cottage cheese with canned peaches was once promoted as a health-conscious side, showing up in both school cafeterias and family dining rooms. A scoop of cottage cheese placed on a lettuce leaf topped with a peach half from a can was considered both attractive and nutritious. Housewives appreciated how quickly it could be prepared, requiring no cooking at all. It fit the mid-century belief in light, protein-rich meals, offering a break from heavier starchy sides. Children sometimes enjoyed the sweetness of the peaches, but were less convinced by the curds of cottage cheese. Still, the dish was embraced because it was affordable and widely adaptable. It appeared often in diet magazines and cookbooks of the 1970s, tied to ideas of eating healthy while still feeling indulgent. Today, cottage cheese with canned peaches has largely disappeared from family tables, replaced by modern health trends. But once, it stood as a proud example of how simple pairings could deliver both flavor and nutrition without straining household budgets. Sunshine carrot salad was one of the brightest and cheeriest dishes on 1970s buffet tables. Grated carrots were mixed with raisins and crushed pineapple, then bound together with mayonnaise. The result was colorful, sweet, and tangy, offering a refreshing balance to heavier foods. It was a favorite at picnics and church suppers because it was inexpensive and easy to make in large quantities. Housewives liked it because it looked vibrant and wholesome, while children enjoyed the sweet fruit mixed in with the vegetables. It carried the cheerful name of Sunshine Carrot Salad because of its bright orange hue and fruity flavor. The mayonnaise added creaminess that turned it into more of a salad than a dessert, though it walked the line between the two. Sunshine Carrot Salad may not have survived modern tastes, but in the 1970s it represented the desire to make everyday vegetables more appealing. It was simple, colorful, and dependable, which made it a lasting memory for many families. Eggplant Parmesan bites were small baked slices of eggplant layered with tomato sauce and cheese, creating finger food that was both indulgent and convenient. These bite-sized delights appeared in Betty Crocker cookbooks as an appetizer or side dish that offered a taste of Italian-inspired comfort food. The eggplant slices were breaded and baked or lightly fried, then topped with rich tomato sauce and melted mozzarella or Parmesan cheese. The layering of flavors and textures made for a satisfying bite that was crispy on the edges and gooey on top. Eggplant Parmesan bites were popular at parties and family dinners, providing a crowd-pleasing option that was easy to serve and eat. Their warm, savory profile made them a beloved side that added a touch of elegance without fuss. This dish reflected the mid-century American embrace of international flavors adapted to home cooking traditions. Baked stuffed apples were not always about sugar and cinnamon. In Grandma's kitchen, they could be savory too, filled with sausage, breadcrumbs, and chopped nuts or onions. The apples were cored and packed with the mixture, then baked until soft and just slightly caramelized on the outside. The stuffing soaked up the apple juices and turned into something warm and earthy with just a hint of sweetness. It was the kind of side dish that blurred the lines between sweet and savory in the best way. Served with pork chops or roast poultry, it brought balance and surprise to the plate. You might have seen them during holidays or Sunday dinners when Grandma wanted to offer something memorable. They looked beautiful too, rustic and golden, with a scent that filled the kitchen. Nowadays, we think of apples as pie or snack food, not as a vehicle for stuffing. But once upon a time, they held more than sugar. They held creativity, thrift, and a kind of elegance we do not always recognize anymore. Sour cream noodle bake was the kind of creamy, carb-loaded side dish that quietly filled plates and bellies all across America, especially at mid-century potlucks and family dinners. You would boil up egg noodles, toss them with sour cream, butter, chives, and sometimes a little cheese, then bake the whole thing until warm and bubbling with golden edges. It was pure comfort food, straight from the faded pages of those old spiral-bound cookbooks that promised to stretch your groceries and still bring something hearty to the table. Sour cream noodle bake balanced creamy richness with just enough tang, making it a perfect side for roast chicken, pork chops, or fried meats when times were lean. Families leaned on recipes like this because it was affordable, filling, and easy to whip up with pantry staples, especially when grocery budgets were tight and every meal needed to count. You would find it at church dinners, neighborhood potlucks, or scribbled on index cards tucked in recipe boxes, quietly holding its place as a dependable, cozy side dish. It slipped off most menus today, but back then, it made every plate feel just a little more complete. Cottage cheese and pear salad was the gentle whisper among louder dishes, the quiet confidence of mid-century ladies' luncheons. One half of a canned pear rested like a jewel on crisp lettuce, topped with a perfect scoop of cottage cheese, often crowned with a cherry for color. It was simple, elegant, and healthy. 3 words that ruled every homemaker's dream in the 1950s. The contrast of creamy, salty cheese against sweet, syrupy fruit made it strangely satisfying. In an era when women were told to eat light, this dish became both virtue and victory. You could serve it with pride at bridge club or enjoy it alone on a sunny porch. The plate didn't need heat or effort, just grace. For many, it symbolized a life of balance between indulgence and restraint, sweetness and discipline. Even if the canned fruit came from the pantry, the presentation felt fresh, proper, and full of charm. Today, it might look like diet food from another planet, but back then, it was sophistication in its simplest form. One bite, and you understood exactly what mid-century America thought refined tasted like. Baked rice and raisins was a thrifty side dish that blurred the line between savory and sweet, offering families both comfort and frugality. Rice was baked with milk, sugar, and raisins, creating a lightly sweetened dish that could sit alongside meats as easily as it could finish a meal. Housewives liked it because it stretched inexpensive staples into something that felt satisfying and filling. It required little effort, yet it emerged from the oven warm and golden, with raisins adding bursts of sweetness. Children often looked forward to it because it tasted closer to dessert than vegetables. For adults, it was a versatile side that paired with pork or chicken just as well as it could stand on its own. The dish appeared frequently in community cookbooks, passed down as a dependable recipe for lean times. Over the years, as meals became more specialized, baked rice and raisins faded away. Still, it remains a symbol of mid-century thrift, proving that creativity could transform humble staples into family favorites. French dressing mold was one of the more daring uses of gelatin during the decade, turning salad dressing into a solid side dish. Housewives would combine French dressing with unflavored gelatin, then fold in vegetables like celery, olives, or green peppers before letting it set in ornate molds. The result was a wobbly, tangy creation that looked almost too strange to eat, but always sparked conversation. Served sliced, it offered bright color and unusual texture alongside heavier mains. Some versions included hard-boiled eggs for extra substance. French dressing mold reflected the obsession with molds that swept through kitchens at the time, where anything could be transformed into a shimmering side. It was thrifty, it was experimental, and it carried the charm of novelty. Though it is hard to imagine today, guests once accepted it as part of the playful spread. French dressing mold may not have aged well, but it remains a clear reminder of the fearless culinary creativity of the 1970s. Baked zucchini casserole was a satisfying and versatile vegetable side that combined tender zucchini slices with cheese, breadcrumbs, and herbs for a warm, comforting dish. This casserole appeared frequently in Betty Crocker cookbooks as an easy way to make use of garden-fresh zucchini or grocery store finds. The zucchini was layered or mixed with a creamy cheese sauce, topped with crunchy breadcrumbs, then baked until golden brown and bubbling. This method brought out the best in zucchini's mild flavor, adding richness and texture that made the dish irresistible. The herbs provided fragrant notes that elevated the casserole's taste, while the toasted crust added a delightful contrast to the soft interior. Ideal for summer dinners or holiday spreads, baked zucchini casserole was cherished for its combination of freshness, comfort, and ease. It offered a delicious way to enjoy vegetables that felt indulgent without being heavy. This recipe was a testament to mid-century ingenuity in the kitchen, turning simple ingredients into something truly special. Wilted lettuce salad sounds like something gone wrong, but in Grandma's kitchen, it was magic. She would start with tender leaf lettuce, picked fresh if she had a garden, and pour a hot dressing made from bacon drippings, vinegar, sugar, and salt right over the top. The leaves would soften slightly, just enough to take on the tangy, savory warmth of the dressing. Sliced onions or hard-boiled eggs were sometimes added, depending on the season. It was best eaten immediately, while still warm, and it felt like a treat, even though it was made from next to nothing. The flavor was bold, salty-sweet, and impossible to forget. Wilted lettuce was especially common in the Appalachian South and the Midwest, where thrift met tradition in the best ways. It turned plain greens into something special without needing cheese, croutons, or bottled dressing. These days, people want their salads cold and crisp, but there was something deeply satisfying about a bowl of warm greens straight from Grandma's hands. Bean-molded salad was one of those curious creations from vintage cookbooks that made vegetables and gelatin collide in the strangest way. You would take the classic 3-bean salad, green beans, wax beans, kidney beans, and suspend the whole thing in lemon or lime-flavored gelatin, set it in a mold, and proudly serve it at potlucks or family dinners. Back in the 1950s and 60s, molded salads were a rite of passage in every community cookbook, and this one was no different. It looked fancy, stretched pantry staples, and made sure not a single bean went to waste. People loved it for the bright colors, wobbly texture, and how it sat proudly next to roast meats or casseroles. It might sound a little off-putting now, but back then, molded salads were considered practical and even impressive. This one in particular packed protein, vegetables, and a little retro flair all in one strange, shimmering dish. You might not see it outside of vintage recipe cards today, but once upon a time, it was the talk of every potluck. Candied sweet potatoes with marshmallows were proof that America never met a vegetable it could not turn into dessert. Golden orange slices baked in syrup, topped with soft white marshmallows that toasted just enough to form a sugary crust. It looked like something out of a fairy tale. Bright, shiny, impossible to resist. On Thanksgiving tables everywhere, this dish was more about nostalgia than nutrition. Families expected it, grandmothers perfected it. The smell of caramelized sugar and buttered yams filled the air long before anyone carved the turkey. It was sweet, it was sticky, and it was comfort in pure form. People might pretend to make it for the vitamins, but everyone knew better. It was childhood on a plate, the edible memory of holiday laughter and second servings. In a decade when life was about doing more with less, this dish said otherwise. Sometimes excess was the point. You could almost measure a family's spirit by how golden their marshmallows came out. And when everyone leaned back in their chairs, plates empty and hearts full, you could bet this dish was the one they remembered most. Three-bean salad was once a guaranteed sight at picnics and reunions, its bright colors and tangy flavor standing out among heavier dishes. The mix of green beans, wax beans, and kidney beans marinated in a vinegar dressing made it both refreshing and economical. Housewives loved how simple it was to prepare, since all it required was canned beans, vinegar, sugar, and oil, plus maybe a few onions if available. The salad could be made in advance, stored in the refrigerator, and brought out ready to serve, which made it perfect for busy families. Its sweet and sour tang cut through greasy barbecue or fried chicken, making it practical as well as tasty. Children sometimes picked around the beans, but most adults welcomed it as a lighter dish among calorie-heavy meals. Over time, creamy potato salads and coleslaws began to replace it, pushing three-bean salad out of favor. Once a star of the picnic table, it is now rarely made at all, leaving behind memories of simpler gatherings where vinegar and sugar worked small miracles in everyday cooking. Frosted lime salad was a vivid green spectacle that lived on buffet tables and Sunday dinners throughout the decade. It began with lime-flavored gelatin, which was poured into molds and chilled until firm. On top of that shimmering green base, housewives would spread a frosting made of cream cheese blended with crushed pineapple. The result was a layered dish that was part dessert, part salad, and entirely a conversation starter. Guests marveled at its bold color and unusual combination of tangy, sweet, and creamy flavors. Children enjoyed the pineapple while adults admired the cool, refreshing texture. It was one of those recipes that fit perfectly into the gelatin craze of the 1970s, where even salads were expected to jiggle. Frosted lime salad carried an almost retro elegance, presented in rings, domes, or squares depending on the mold used. Though its popularity faded, it still embodies the playful experimentation of an era that valued novelty as much as taste. In its own quirky way, frosted lime salad reflected the 1970s at its brightest and boldest. Cold noodle salad with sesame dressing was a chilled side dish featuring tender noodles tossed in a nutty, flavorful sesame dressing and mixed with crisp, chopped vegetables. This recipe was featured in Betty Crocker cookbooks as a refreshing and light accompaniment to heavier mains, perfect for warm weather meals and picnics. The noodles, often spaghetti or thin egg noodles, were cooked and cooled before being combined with a dressing made from sesame oil, soy sauce, vinegar, and a touch of sweetness. Chopped vegetables such as cucumbers, carrots, and scallions added crunch and color, making the dish both visually appealing and texturally satisfying. Cold noodle salad with sesame dressing offered a harmonious blend of savory, tangy, and nutty flavors that delighted the palate. It was prized for its simplicity, versatility, and ability to be prepared ahead of time. This dish reflected mid-century America's growing interest in international flavors and lighter fare, while still maintaining approachable home cooking sensibilities. How did we let those recipes disappear? Cottage cheese Jell-O salad was one of those curious creations that somehow became a potluck staple all across America. It mixed creamy cottage cheese with lemon or lime gelatin, and if that was not bold enough, people often added celery, grated carrots, or pineapple chunks. You would walk into a family reunion or church dinner in the 1940s, and there it was, wobbling in all its glory next to fried chicken or meatloaf. People loved it because it looked presentable, stretched ingredients, and felt like something special during tight grocery budgets. You might not see it on modern tables, but back then, molded salads were more than a trend. They were pure kitchen creativity when you had to make do. This one came straight from old community cookbooks with curled pages and faded ink, the kind passed down through families who knew how to stretch every dollar. Glazed turnips were one of Grandma's ways of making stubborn vegetables taste like something worth getting seconds of. She would peel and cube them, then simmer them in a pan with butter, sugar, and a splash of broth or vinegar until they were soft and glossy. The natural bitterness of the turnip mellowed into something sweet and earthy, with a flavor that felt oddly fancy for such a humble root. Glazed turnips were often served beside roasts or ham, especially when the fancier vegetables were too expensive or out of season. It was the kind of dish that showed up quietly, then disappeared just as quietly. No fuss, no leftovers. A lot of kids wrinkled their noses at first, but ended up going back for more. You almost never hear about this recipe now, not even in family newsletters or holiday cookbooks. But there was a time when turnips had their moment, and Grandma made sure of it. It was not about turning vegetables into something they were not. It was about bringing out the best in what you had. Molded shrimp salad was the grand finale of the gelatin craze. The ocean met the mold, and the result was unforgettable. Chopped shrimp, celery, and pimentos folded into pink-tinted gelatin made with tomato or mayonnaise. Yes, you heard that right. It sounds outrageous now, but at the time it was considered glamorous, even modern. The seafood twist made it fancy, the kind of dish you brought to impress your guests. People admired it before they tasted it, sometimes wisely. But it captured a certain spirit, the belief that innovation and good taste were the same thing. This was America in full mid-century bloom, fearless and experimental in the kitchen. Housewives saw it as proof that they could create restaurant-worthy dishes from everyday ingredients. Sure, it was strange, but it was also bold. And that might be why it still fascinates us today. Not because it was delicious, but because it reminds us of a time when creativity, not caution, ruled the dinner table. Which forgotten side dish deserves a spot on your table again? Drop your memories in the comments below, hit the like button, and subscribe so you never miss another taste of the past.